Hello, everyone. Today I am with Elisabet Lahti, and Elizabeth is an international presenter on topics related to applied psychology. She did her PhD research on the ancient Finnish concept of Sisu, which denotes courage and determination in the face of extreme adversity and the ability to unlock hidden inner strength. In 2018, she completed a 2,400-kilometre run. I can hardly believe this as I'm reading this out, Elizabeth, and bicycle ride around New Zealand. Let's call it a jaunt around New Zealand. And that would have been a wonderful opportunity to explore Sisu, as we are going to today. So welcome to you.
Thank you so much. I've been really looking forward to this, to go a little bit deeper into the waters of Sisu.
Elizabeth, this morning when I woke up, I was thinking, I went to India when I was young, and Gita is the great, the song of the divine, the Gita, which is the great story of India, right? And I remember one of the things that stuck with me is that Arjuna was on the battlefield and the god of the Gita. So there was two opposing armies, coming together on the battlefield. And Arjuna just wasn't very keen to fight in that battle. And the god of the Gita said, you have to fight, you have to take part in that battle. And, we could see it kind of literally, but it seems to me that to step into life is to step onto a battlefield, and to not lead a provisional life, but to enter into life is to step on. And often that battle is an inner battle as well. So these were some of the things that I was hoping we could maybe talk about. And I wanted to know what is Sisu? How did you develop that? Why did you get into that research? Could you tell us a little bit about that?
I think I have to return a little bit to that beautiful bridge that you built, the intro with the conversation between Arjuna and Lord Krishna, the battlefield. I've looked at that the epoch many times, and I am really impressed how across the history of humankind, in myth, in story, this same narrative keeps repeating itself, which is that we enter this experience that's going to be extremely difficult. And constantly what these stories seek to teach through narrative and myth is the importance of courage and discipline, so that, because life is about being a disciple, we really are here on an ultra marathon, whether we're running it with our feet touching the ground or we're running inwards. So, and what Arjuna goes through in this story is an entire whirlwind of what we humans go through as well, that we have to face adversities that seem insurmountable. We have to even sometimes go against what seems to be our almost like better judgment in order to break through certain barriers so that we gain clarity. And so my own life,
just before going on with that, Elizabeth, I think that there is another element to this that I want to bring in, is that I think remembering maybe the New Age, the 70s and the 80s, and spiritual groups and all of that. And there were a lot of people that maybe thought at that time that the spiritual journey was very much about love and all about love, really. And if you think about it, the warrior has been a little, we've seen the dark side of the warrior, haven't we? The shadow side, where it's displayed in the wrong way and all of that. But on the other hand, the warrior is like an archetype, you know, if you take it from the Jung world. You know, I think there's that book, King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, or whatever. So it's kind of like we need that warrior archetype. And when I first heard, I heard a little bit about what you were doing. I think I heard a bit of a podcast or whatever. But Sisu seems to be talking about that warrior archetype, and but it has a bit of a different feel about it. It's not just the kind of mad, masculine, yang, Viking, rush out and slay a few, you know, cut off a few heads kind of feel, but it has a kind of a bit more of a yin thing. So it's warrior and it's got a bit of yin at the same time.
If done correctly, you know, Sisu, because Sisu is, well, I'll define what it is to our listeners and our friends online. Sisu denotes this latent reserve of energy and power within every individual. So Sisu is a Finnish word, about 500 years old or so, but as a quality, as it relates to life force, it's universal. Every single human has this, what we call Sisu in the Finnish language.
Yeah.
It literally means the inside, the interior. You can say it guts, it could be intestinal fortitude. So it's not just this when we will our way out from something. Yeah. And the thing with Sisu is that it's a reserve that we pull from when we come to a point where we think we have given everything we have. So we are at the end of our preconceived mental or physical capacities. Yet when we stay, what we see from research and our own anecdotes over and over again is that we find more strength when we don't give up just yet. But Sisu can be the power and the resource that allows us to overcome, but it can also be the very thing that leads to our demise if we do it wrong. So there is the high octave Sisu, and then there's the what I call the dark Sisu, which is not maybe the best description for it, but the low octave. But I want to a little bit go back to the warrior, because you're giving me so many beautiful bridges to really kind of be a bit deeper with Sisu, which I feel like I don't often get to do to this extent in a conversation. And you mentioned the warrior and the archetype. And sadly, when we overuse a word or concept like love, it can lose its power and the essence. The phenomena doesn't, but in language. But when I think of a warrior, you know, warrior is someone who wars. He or she wages war. And how important it is when we look at our mind, you know, how many diminishing branches and the undergrowth is there that's covering up the life force that we have. So what I would take from the warrior is that, yes, I must wage war against the diminishing undergrowth of my own mind, which is then covering up the veil of life force standing in its way.
I like
this
that.
is the beauty of myth and
the deep
narrative.
Under the surface rhizome, you know, the root system of the plant, and some of that is also archaic in our DNA, and it's bottomless in a way. You know, I think sometimes with our persona of, you know, we should be nice, we should be politically correct, we should adjust, you know, as well, that sometimes we get so into that. You know, you can call that middle class life as well. It's kind of like, you know, that aspect of life of people pleasing along the way to get ahead. That's like a middle class message. But down in the psyche, there's this reserve, there's this store, as you say. I think that's wonderful.
Yeah. And sometimes, you know, think back in your life, like we don't want to get, how would I say, domesticated, you know? there's the balance between that, what Taoism gets so beautifully and tries to explain the unexplainable and the unnamed through this polarity of yin and yang. So the whole quest, and why when I wrote my first book on Sisu, I called it Gentle Power, not Sisu, because the whole invitation is to walk the path of not just either go one way to really hardcore Sisu and achieve what we want at all cost, or go too much into gentleness where we become domesticated and we're teethless, and people run us over. Either way is bad, either direction. But the path of wisdom, that's really a long, hard path to walk, which I would say it's my version of individuation almost. It's one path to it. There are many paths.
Yeah.
Bring together in harmony those two, and oh my God, it's so difficult.
Well, I think that's maybe what they call the middle way in ancient literature sometimes, or it's kind of like not being one-sided, not being too far to. I don't know. I can only use a bit of slang, but there's like the really yang Sisu, isn't there? Like but myth will tell you if you get hubris, and if you get too one-sided in the masculine, let's call it that, for want of a better term, that inner life can really dry up and die, But then if we become so yin, because I remember reading, I know we're going around a bit here, and I'd said that I was
perfect. Life goes
we can get back onto it. But I remember Thomas More saying once, he's someone I like reading, and he's a Jungian author or whatever, Care of the Soul. He said, just to write something requires aggression, which surprised me at the time, but it's like, when you think about it, like, to put a view out there, to put your unique view or something, and especially in the present climate, there's going to be people that disagree. So, I think we've got such a negative view of the warrior, the aggression, as such, because we've seen so much negative forms of it. But then again, how many people have been stifled in their life or their creativity or whatever because they're not prepared to put their view out there, because they don't want to face the adversity or the criticism or
to do that with either of the feminine forms of energy and archetypes, or the masculine. If we view it only based on the negative experiences we've had, we lose the essence of it. And that's happening both to the feminine, which, let's say, the principle of gentleness. The biggest lie about gentleness is that it's about being passive. It's about not being able to express yourself, and it's weak. Like, that's so not true. The power of gentleness, actually, when we look at neuroscience or neuropsychology of how the body works. So when a person is actually in a state of what I would say gentleness, which is the parasympathetic activation, we are relaxed, we are soft, we are open, we have better access to our cognitive resources, we're more creative, we're more collaborative, caring and nurturing to our friends and our kin, to other people. So the Tao Te Ching says that, is chapter 23 or 28, that we must know the yang, but live from the yin. So that the soft is actually the foundation. But the same thing is happening with the masculine, that because we have so many horrible experiences of, I'm talking now the masculine energy, whether it's expressed by a man or a woman, because when masculine goes into its extreme, it becomes harsh and hard. It becomes violence.
Cold.
And so the path is not to push it away, but still keep the heart open and be able to embrace everything in that phenomena and say, that's high octave, that's low octave. Where am I expressing it, and how is the world doing? And then just always bring it back to my own responsibility for my own actions. There's no other way.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of like
getting our passion here.
It's, it is an area which is full of different exploration, because, what is it? inferiorization of the feminine, in terms of that shows how we've been so hyper masculinized in a way, doesn't it? Because we see something as gentle as not being strong necessarily. But that, going back to how I originally, when I heard you speak in a podcast, I think I was thinking that Sisu reminded me a little bit of Aikido or something. It's kind of like, someone comes at you with a big force, rather than necessarily confront it directly, you go with and then move it around. And so there's something a bit, you know what I mean? Like you can understand it in those terms, It's just that our society's become so competitive and masculinized that we don't really always understand that art of it.
Yeah, the art of life, really. It's the polarization, quick to react to whether something is good or bad, the hyper masculinization, the hyper sexualization, hyper anything really. It takes us, I would say, it takes me from the path, because it is about the whole idea with cognitive dissonance means that we're able to hold two polar opposites at the same time and not close off, but be inquisitive about it, because that opens a dialogue, and we need a dialogue as humans, and to have healthy Sisu as opposed to the unconstructive, destructive, hurtful Sisu, which can lead to I overextend myself. It leads to burnout, accidents. There can be hurt to the people around me, to my environment. People who have way too much Sisu, they can be really a nightmare to work with in teams, in families, because they impose their own extremely harsh standards around mental strength and fortitude and Sisu onto other people.
Yeah.
And then third thing with hurtful or harmful Sisu is that it stifles the thought process, that we become cloudy, we get stubborn and fixed on a goal, and we stop taking information from outside that we should do because we need to be able to adapt. And that's the Aikido, which I happen to love, and I use it as an example in the book too quite a lot as well. So glad you mentioned it.
Yeah, that's good. Well, let's get back. Can we go back now to what we were meant to start with, in my mind at least? Can we go back to how, why did you start this journey of Sisu, and with your research, and how did that all develop, and how has your thinking changed along the way as you've done it?
Oh, wow.
A few small questions just there for you.
It's so I've never had research and private life. They've been a unit, so research for me was always a path of self-inquiry and understanding the world and myself in that context. Yeah. And the journey began as, for you humans, usually the heroes and the sheroes and the macro and micro journeys begin from a need that we need to understand something. And for me, the quest for Sisu started from a really like I needed to understand how humans overcome extreme adversity, because I was in that space myself in 2010, October. I had just found my way out from an extremely violent and abusive relationship. I was living in New York City, and the relationship ended. He ended up getting deported from the country. There was a 5-year-long restraining order, and it was a complete mess. It's like I started this very long journey to find myself, rebuild. And after violence, because it attacks that thing that's the very core of being able to be a human, which means that we have to trust another human to relate. Right. So violence inside the premises of your own home it attacks that, the most sacred. So there was this long journey to also, how does a human build trust? Are we able to love again? You know, all these things which are so essential to us as humans, and to be able to join. And so what kept me up at nights was this question. And I still remember there were two parts to it. And I never thought that I would end up on this kind of an adventure to find the answers for myself. The first question was, how do humans overcome extreme adversity? And who does, who doesn't? What can we learn from those who have and who haven't? How might I find those answers for myself? And how did I survive to the point that I'm even asking these questions and I have the sanity for it? And then the second part was that with all that information that I might find and from other people, how might we help each other as humans to avoid some of the most common potholes on the way to healing and this energy and this strength, whatever we have, so we don't fall into all kinds of silly potholes. And so that was the beginning point, my personal need to
your academic goals.
I was not
as well. They were both connected.
Yeah, exactly. And back in the day, I was living in New York. I had a completely different job. What happened to me was this apparently pretty common phenomena, which is described as post-traumatic growth, which is research by Richard Tedeschi, who's an American researcher and clinical psychologist. Which is as opposed to post-traumatic stress that we all have heard about. But what he saw with his patients and clients was that many of them, with enough time, with enough support, when they started healing, they didn't only come back to the base level, but they actually grew as a result of this trauma in very significant ways, which showed itself as this newly discovered sense of meaning, sense of clarity around one's life goals. I call it like less tolerance of bullshit, which I definitely developed.
You can't say that on this podcast.
My own bullshit. Huh?
You can't say that on this podcast. Sorry.
No,
just you're right.
The bullshit. And then a deeper sense of compassion for other people and their suffering. So very deep core things we need to understand. So that was a divining moment for me before and after the trauma.
Can I say it in my jargon just for a second? You know, because as you know, I'm interested in the Jung, world, if you want to put it that way. But sometimes I think there's a forced deepening. And if you look towards myth, the book of Job, he is swallowed by a whale.
Yes.
And taken under, and it's kind of like, there's this part of us, like I'm going back 1 second. It's like, I think maybe when you're young, and very idealistic, a bit naive, 15, 16, 17, you think, I'll get good marks at school, work really hard, and it's going to be a straight upward line to success or something like that. But then somewhere along the line, there's this maybe a forced deepening, and in Persephone, she was abducted into the underworld. Psyche had to go into the underworld to fetch the box of beauty. But it's like, I remember, again, I think it was Thomas More when he wrote this book, Dark Nights of the Soul. He was talking about when Job went into the belly of the whale, it's like his hair went grey or whatever, but he saw mighty mysteries down there. I'm just trying to get back to what you were saying about to me, that's a really important point about it. It's not just the dark night of the soul, but sometimes it's this confrontation can also open your heart. It's not that we'd necessarily choose it. No one says, oh, I'd love to go on a dark night of the soul next week. That'd be fantastic. Because we kind of have this model of going up, but in that confrontation, we lose some of the rubbish, which you're calling the bullshit, which can't sound it, but it's kind of like it's burnt away, which isn't necessarily easy. let's face it. But somehow there is a need or a necessity it's like becoming more naked, you know, it's like losing some of the outer persona and the you know, the outside things we had to kind of signal who we are and what we are, you know, when really to go back to the guts of it is what we kind of need in a funny kind of way.
Yeah, you need guts to go into the guts. Find your guts when you know, go into the guts. I'm reminded of a line from Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl, very short line that I was just really obsessed with for a while, which is that, kind of almost quoting it correctly maybe here, but it's like, that which is to give light must endure burning.
Yeah. It's also true, you know, in alchemy and all that as well. It's like that, the stages, like you can, let's say the stages of an individuation process, but that burning away maybe as a first stage, the blackness and the darkness of that, and then the other colors maybe come, but it's kind of like the fire of transformation, wasn't it?
Yeah, burns. So that has been the journey, and I would say almost that some kind of a dive into the belly of the whale it was a 12-year journey almost. That it feels like it kind of ended only about a year ago, during which I was there finding those mysteries and really kind of to align with what you're saying, as a gift. And it was hard, but I found myself. I mean, what is that self? But there's a clearer, there's a sobriety when it comes to life, to seeing other people, to not be fooled by facades, self-respect, all those things.
I think this thing of, you know, like I kind of came out of that 60s thing, you know, where there was an innocence and a naivety sometimes about things, I think. And to be honest, it's in retrospect, it's good to have lost some of that innocence or over ideal
gullibility. Yeah, the gullibleness, whatever.
But that doesn't say it's easy. I mean, we're not, what's the word? Not devaluing the power of what's happened, you know, or the you know, the experience of what's happened, and sometimes the harshness of that as well. But at the same time, just seeing that other side, that in a way that the death and the rebirth sometimes go together a little, you know.
I kind of think that because life is a bundle of these paradoxes, and that's the thing, that the Tao that can be named is not the real Tao, is like the mother of all these paradoxes, but it's perfect. And it almost feels like we come here as the child, the infant, and that's the innocence. We're gullible. We reach out and we throttle forwards, you know, and explore.
Very trusting.
Very trusting. Too much, you know.
Yeah.
So we go through this whole journey we end up being in the belly of the whale several times, sometimes extremely painful lessons. And yet what most of the spiritual scriptures describe is that for us to, that the secret is actually to become a child again, that we're able to return to that innocence, but we return with the adult who has that sobriety, and that person comes back to the child. And that's something
I agree with. I agree with you so much that it's the child on the other side of innocence and naive. You know, it's kind of like, you know, it's the real one.
Yeah.
And you see it in older people. It can be beautiful. People that have been through so much. Like next to me, next door, there's a lady who's about 85, and she's been through so many health things and that. there's just this like gratitude for the whole of life almost. That's how it seems to me. Like that's what I get from, you know. But it's through having been through so much that there's that kind of like a beautiful innocence, gratitude towards life, you know.
Yeah, and it's a gorgeous thing to see a person who is able to, again, when I'm bringing it back to this like balance of Sisu and gentleness, because it is a hard thing to embody.
Yeah.
But when I do see a person who's able to hold those two qualities at the same time, that graceful strength, I think it's one of the most moving sights. For example, for this old lady that we're referring to, or someone, that if she or he is, you know, able to have gone through the harshness of life, endure the burning so that she might give light, is that she's not infantile or an infant, but she's childlike. So there's the maturity and the play. And oh my goodness, that's what I hope to be when I'm in my 120 years, that I somehow embody those two.
Why wait until you're 120? Try to age before then.
I think for me, it's going to take time, you know, so.
So tell me a little bit how it changed for you. You know, when you started the research, did you have an idea of what you were doing? You know, how sometimes, and then what's changed? What's been the major changes for you?
I think the huge, I want to demonstrate something. So I will get my my beautiful book, because I want to show the cover, because there's a clue there. So hold on.
Okay.
It's like a live situation with like apparel coming in.
When you first said that, I thought you were going to go out and do a marathon run or something like that. And I was like, oh, and then you like, get the books.
Let me demonstrate.
Gentle power.
But what changed the most for me was, I think the key point actually for all of this that I'm seeing now in my life, that I'm able to become more relaxed and ease with being me and being a human and being alive and all this life stuff. It goes back to day 12 of the 50 days in New Zealand. I went there to collect data for my PhD on Sisu.
Yeah.
You know, what does actually happen when we come to that place where we're completely naked and bare and we have nothing? Yeah. And I memoed on all of this and had this, you know, so it was autoethnography and phenomenology were my research frameworks for those who are interested.
Yeah.
And the PhD is online, by the way, so anyone can go and download the summary. So I had been running 12 days consecutively, 30 miles per day, which is about 49 kilometers. Yeah. And I was starting to develop this this injury on my right ankle. And so what was happening there was, as I was on the road and I was running the highways, mostly alone, I had a lot of time to think. And there was this constant narration in my head in which the road was this character who was constantly inquiring about my past, about my present, about my choices. So it was a very personal, intimate journey for me.
Yeah.
And then on day 12, in the middle of this massive amount of pressure, I was coming to actually the most important, crucial point, for which I do think the whole 50 days existed for this day 12. And the rest was just all these experiences and little lessons here and there. But what really is highlighted for me is this day 12. So suddenly I heard the road say, it was my own psyche, obviously.
Yeah.
That I'm not there yet, you know. So the road was saying that, do you see that bend over there in the far distance, the next curve? I'm like, yeah, I see it. And then the road said, well, you know, when you run there and you get to that bend, you know what? There's going to be another bend. And there's going to be another bend. And that you will never run out of road by running it. That this can go on forever if you want, you know. And that got my attention. And then the second question I had to ponder on was this thing that if I keep pushing how I was doing it with this Sisu and testing my limits, I simulated a situation that I actually get to the end of these 50 days. And when I look back, will I say, and this is a good practice for anyone who's trying to decide whether they're pushing too hard or how far to push, this is a question that we all ask, and there's no one size fits all.
Yeah.
And so I simulated myself, projected into the 50 days and asked, did I do this? I finished it. Did I do this at all cost?
Yeah.
That I now have to go repair and there's hurt, or did I do it in a way that I can say that I honored myself and others? And then what are the two narratives, archetypes that those represent? And that was the moment when I realized also what the road told me, that, Elizabet, the pain will stop when you make it stop. And I saw how this sentence projected to me by my own psyche related to all my past experiences where I had completely overstayed the time I was supposed to stay somewhere, including a violent relationship, because I so much wanted to see this person change and there would be a happy ending to it. Yeah. That was my inner little psychologist wanting to help everyone, and we can't go about that, So boundaries, self-worth, all these things. And then the big realization hit me, which feels so obvious now, but I realized that throughout my life, it had been somehow easier for me to be hard on myself than to be kind and merciful, because I had associated strength to this pushing through and this kind of Sisu. So that was
would you say you've got a type A side to your personality, like a type A achiever?
I think I was that, but there was I don't think somehow I think I've been in the process of becoming, whereas who I actually am has been kind of overmasked by certain qualities, because these don't usually change. But that's not who I see myself to be now, that there's been a massive slowing down and yet being very active. So it's not a becoming passive or giving up on anything, but it's just a change of quality. Maybe it's maturation. Maybe I'm still the A-type,
One thing that I was thinking when you were saying that is, like, if you look at archetypal psychology with the different gods and different archetypes, right? It's like, okay, warrior is one of, so if it's all warrior and no lover, that's no good. If it's all lover, no warrior, it's kind of like, in a way, we need, and then, there's the magician or the king or the queen or what, but it's kind of like, just using that model for a second, but it's kind of like, they complement each other, the archetypes or the different gods or whatever. And I remember James Hillman saying once that the soul goes to therapy, our psyche goes to therapy looking for love. It's kind of like the soul needs to love itself, to be loved. It's like that. So it's kind of like, we can't not have any warrior in my language, but we need all of them somehow in the right way. And, maybe that's the never-ending task, of trying to get them in the right proportions or whatever.
It's just like humans need to recharge and get power, so does my computer, because we all run on some kind of a power source. So I'm going to plug mine in. So just a moment. Such a beautiful metaphor, again, like how the healthy Sisu as a constructive quality, why it needs to be gentle. Gentle, the word can also be mature, sober, constructive, all that, so that we're able to kind of be tenderly attuning to our level of life force and learn to become aware of it. I mean, many of us move through our lives just kind of thrashing around and reacting and not slowing down to pause to really know who we are. And when we do that, we can actually start to read our own energy and our own life force. And then we realized the importance of sleep, of nutrition, of movement, which are the basic things. There's no other tools really, but we kind of keep pushing them away because it's easier, used to be for me to keep looking for more tools and read more books, listen to more podcasts.
Yeah.
And by doing so, not actually attending to what I really needed to do, because most of us already have all the information. It's just that, do we start with some one simple thing, like the breath, for example?
Yeah.
And learn to do that really well.
That's a beautiful way of describing. Yeah, it's kind of like, what does the soul want, or what does the soul, as we're walking along the way. And can you tell me a little bit what you've learned about yin and yang? How has your thinking changed about that? How would you talk about it now in your life?
I guess I want to go a little bit personal on that one. I personally, because I had such a preference for yang, because it's been because of my old patterning from youth, I've always had to kind of be tough and be a self-made woman. So I've had this preference for yang and the strength, because it gets shit done.
Yeah.
So we see the results quickly with this. But there's always a trouble when we start to prefer one thing over the other. So then we get biased. And then we start to I started to create subconscious resentment for the other quality, which was the yin. Because I was a woman who saw the feminine qualities as a bit of weakness, that it's not taking full responsibility and all this. So I had a lot of flawed perceptions about that, because I wasn't okay facing those in myself. Because to me, to allow more space for this yin, it felt like giving up control, which is what we do need to also do. There's a beautiful story that I wonder if now it's the right time for it or not, but it's about Hercules and Hydra. But I'll just finish off that sentence by saying that the huge revelation for me was that yin, gentleness, is not weakness, but it is almost actually a superior form of power if we want to compare these, where in reality it's about that they're complementary, and the really high road is to do the arduous work of seeing where we fall off in preference of either or resentment of either, and gently come into harmony with those.
I like what you've it's hard to be in our what we live in competitive materialism, don't we, in a way. Like that's the dominant story, the dominant culture, and it's kind of like it's hard sometimes not to have a bit of a bias to the yang.
Absolutely.
So it helps that it helps in terms of, and for males, I think that Dionysian is the kind of he's the softer, because to nurture the soul, if we want to put it like that, and all of that, it's like that's where kind of the real stuff comes from often, and sometimes as a male to write or to think of poetry or, but then sometimes I think this is a lot more complicated about that, because the yin, like if you think of the goddesses or whatever, that they're not shrinking violets, all of them, are they? And this whole thing of power, like in the Sumerian, what are they called here? Inanna, and it's like we've got yin and yang both within us or something.
It's repeating itself everywhere. The whole thing is the story of this polarity and duality. And actually, you said just now that it's more complicated than we, and complex or complicated. But I would almost say it's more simple than we think. And we make it very complicated by, for example, mixing and make it so charged with this male and female, as in like man and woman.
Yeah.
Whereas if we look at it like we would look at trees, like we don't have an opinion on a tree, we just observe them. Same if we look at these energies as yin and yang, you know, form and formless is a nice way to go about it. Which means that every living being has these energies, the strong and the supple, and they're in all of us, without fixing them on the gender without so much.
Kind of we genderizing them. And so the way some people do that is by talking about the soul. And I always appreciate that when they, you know, it's like the soul has the yang and the yin. You know what I mean? It's kind of like you don't have to genderize it all the time. That's true.
And then another thing that, you know, we, which kind of shows how completely dependent or mutually inclusive these two are, complementary, is that so no one here survives without the yin, which is the care and nurture. I mean, we need that in order to even make it through our first 24 hours as humans. And yet, let's say the one who's being nurtured, whoever is nurturing, that person or caregiver needs a shelter, which is structure, which is created by the yang principle, which creates the house, you know, inside which we can be sheltered and housed. So when we're vulnerable, so it goes like the egg and the chicken, you know, it goes, builds into infinity. And the wise thing is simply to kind of just slow down and witness all this. And even I would say for this podcast, because we're talking of strength and power a little bit, gentleness, whenever there's an emotion that rises and there's like a little bit of resentment for softness, which it could be for someone, which was me some years ago. The other way around is simply to notice and be like, wow, let me look at that. Why am I irritated? And that opens a portal.
That's true. That's true. Maybe that's kind of a nice place to leave things on, Elizabeth. I mean, I wonder whether you had something that you shared a little earlier from YouTube. Could we maybe go out with a bit of a bang, but with a reading of the YouTube descriptor of life? Is it still there?
You mean the song?
The song, because it spoke of something, didn't it?
Let's leave the story of the Hydra and Hercules for a cliffhanger. Maybe I'll share that in my podcast or something like that, because that's a bit of a long story. So I think I'll save that for later. But you know, those who are interested, I'll put it on my Sisu lab. But I'll go find this lyric that I was so moved by.
You can tell the story of Hydra and Hercules if you want, but if it's a long, you know, please just stop.
Yeah, it's a bit of a long one. It's like a whole chapter in itself. But it is about discipleship, you know, and it's the courage to go into the shadow. The dragon in the story represents the shadow, and we must actually go after it so that we can get into that place of understanding the underworld, like what Jung says, that it's the whole point of life is to bring the unconscious into consciousness, and from there. But I'll leave us this little bang. This could definitely open a whole new conversation, but maybe we'll come back to this sometime, you know. But this for me was a beautiful realization of relates to who I'm now. And as part of being a warrior, it also includes things like being able to accept, you know, be in acceptance and forgive. And in my 40s, you know, to kind of what we often do is we look at our lives and then we have to just look at what it is and integrate and then leave it. So here's something for us who are in the Jung world. And this was a huge realization for me. I'm still beginning, but this just blew my mind when I saw the symbolism of this song by U2. When I was doing my own work with my relationship with my parents, which I believe most of us do, however the relationship has been.
Yeah.
And the song is called The First Time. And it goes like this. This is one of the chorus.
You could sing it if you wanted to, but no, that's okay. Read it out.
Not that brave. Or I have enough self-awareness to know not to. So here's the lyrics. It's not too long.
Yeah.
It just holds an invitation to look at those places in my life and in our lives where we resent going to, and that there might be that treasure, the gold that's in there. Okay. Here we finally go. My father is a rich man. He wears a rich man's cloak. He gave me the keys to his kingdom coming, gave me a cup of gold. He said, I have many mansions, and there are many rooms to see. But I left by the back door, and I threw away the key. And what this speaks to me of is this, all those parts in us which almost often relates to where we came from, the origin, the alkutila in Finnish, which is going back to the place where we're born and our parents, and being able to arrive to a place where we can see people without the expectations we might have for them, and forgive if there's something to be forgiven, and use even our Sisu, because it's not just for physical endeavors, but Sisu is the discipline of discipleship, so that in our psyche we can look at those things that really are the dragons and they daunt us. And when I heard this song, it was in a moment when I realized that because I was able to forgive my parents, I was able to actually go into those rooms, which are the beautiful sides of them, and fetch that cup of gold. And I actually get to access the goodness that's in there. And that's the same metaphor for all the challenges and the adversities, that the only way out is the way in, and through the heart.
The way through, and the heart, as you say. Well, that's a lovely place to finish, and I want to thank you for sharing so beautifully on the basis of your research, and also so honestly and openly as well.
Yeah.
So thank you very much.
Well, thank you for this opportunity. I really super enjoyed having this conversation and this inquiry with you.
Thanks, Elizabeth.